On August 25th, 2025, I released my most favorite and biggest animated project, When Brighton Met Twila. This is a fan animation about my idea on how Brighton and Twila, the Sun and Moon characters from Mario Party 6, had first met. It's one of my most favorite animated videos that I have made, and I'm glad to see that others like it too. But what if I was to tell you that I have an early version of the story? Yep, I originally came up with the story back in I think it was 2023. I got this sketchbook at Five Below and decided to fill it with a bunch of comics. So yeah, there's some other comics in the book, so if you want to see those, I might consider making videos on those too. But today, we're looking at the early version of When Brighton Met Twila. As you can see, it had the same title back then. I did a poll on the Brighton and Twila subreddit over on Reddit asking members what the title should be, and that one happened to have the most votes. I still like The Day We Met, but I look at it as this was the title that was meant to be. Now, the story is basically the same, however, there's a lot of differences. The biggest one is that it's more connected to Mario Party. Some of the other Mario Party hosts actually make some appearances in the early version. There's also parts where they're all, working on, a party island and stuff. In other words, this was also a story on how Mario Party began. There's even one part where you see that they're setting up the party tent that you see in Mario Party 8, but it's really hard to tell. You might be wondering why I decided to separate the Mario Party stuff from the story. Well, I wanted the Brighton and Twila series to be separate from both Mario and Mario Party because I wanted it to focus on just Brighton and Twila and give them, their own series that's separate from Mario. Plus, viewers who aren't familiar with Mario can still enjoy the stories. Alright, so the early version of the story begins completely different compared to the final version. The early version starts with Brighton and Twila telling bedtime stories to Nimbula, an original character of mine that you will be seeing later on in the series. Nimbula wants to hear another story, so Brighton and Twila agree to tell her another story. The story that Nimbula requests is the story of how they met. They both agree that that's a good choice, so Twila allows Brighton to begin the story, and that's where the story begins. Now we get to the part we see in the final version, and that's the part where Brighton meets Twila for the first time. Just like in the final version, Brighton walks out of his house to admire the sunshine. But in the early version, a flutter comes out to greet him. The flutter sees something coming towards them, that being Twila's airship, and the flutter thinks it's one of Bowser's airships. And I have to say, this picture's kind of funny. Brighton says that he doesn't think it's Bowser because it doesn't look like any of his airships. The airship then sputters and stops, just like in the final version. As soon as Twila notices something's wrong, she runs out of her house saying "oh dear" many times. Brighton goes off to help her. The flutter wishes him good luck, and he is not seen throughout the rest of the story. Now in this version, when Twila shows Brighton what's wrong, she takes him to the airship's engine room, a room we do not see in the final version. In the final version, she is already holding the broken gear, so going into the engine room wasn't needed. Actually, the gear had some differences too. In the early version, the gear was extremely rusty to the point that it couldn't move, while in the final version, a piece of it just broke off. Now in the early version, Brighton decides to take the gear to his house and look at it, but because the gear is so heavy, he drops it. Brighton and Twila follow the gear towards an island that is full of construction. A blue toad suddenly sees the gear fall from the sky. The blue toad is upset that they interrupted his work. He explained that he and many others are making a party island. In my opinion, all the Mario Party boards and minigames and such are all on an archipelago, and the early version takes place during the construction on the archipelago. Anyway, when Brighton and Twila talk about how they need to fix the gear, the toad tells them that there's the master of gears on the way and he knows everything about gears, but it'll be a while before he arrives. So Brighton and Twila decide to help with the toad's project, and that's when they finally introduce themselves, which is very similar to the final version. I mean, just look at the similarities. You know, now that I think about it, why did I choose to have a blue toad to lead the project instead of a red toad? The red toad was the first Mario Party host, so that would have made sense. Continuing on, we then see Brighton and Twila helping with the project. Then later tonight, their work is done for the day, so Twila decides to look up at the stars in the sky, and Brighton decides to join her. This is very similar to the final version. There's the part where Twila explains that she doesn't have any friends and the two decide that they could be friends with each other. There's even the accidental handheld, just like in the final version. Now the next part is a scene that was completely removed from the final version. Twila sees what she thinks is the Master of Gears and rushes off to go get his help, but it is not. It's actually a fiery chain chomplet. My sister says she likes how I drew the chain chomplet in this comic. Anyway, Twila isn't sure what to do as she has never seen a chain chomplet before. Brighton decides to help her and calm the chain chomplet down. He sees a nearby bone and uses his magic to bring the bone to him so he can throw it to the chain chomplet. Brighton and Twila use this opportunity to escape. Twila tells him that he was very brave, and he tells her that he didn't want her to get hurt, and that's when they start to fall in love. Later on we see Brighton fishing with Toadsworth. Brighton tells him that he's fallen in love with Twila, but he doesn't use her name. But Toadsworth already figured out it was Twila that he was talking about because he's seen the two together a lot. Toadsworth tells him that he should talk to Twila about how he feels. Brighton then decides that he would set up a spaghetti dinner for her. And MC Ballyhoo randomly shows up shouting, "Did someone say spaghetti?" And that's kind of funny, actually. So later that night, Brighton takes Twila to the surprise dinner, and of course, she's very thrilled to see this. We then get to the part where they admit that they're in love with each other. Now in the final version, Twila says that she's fallen in love with someone, and Brighton thinks that she means someone else until she tells him that someone is him. But in the early version, Twila simply just says that she's fallen for him, and Brighton says fallen, like fallen in love. It's still a cute part, but yeah. It's to the point of this comic that the two are officially in love with each other and we see hearts everywhere. Looking back on this, I feel like this scene doesn't hit the same way as it does in the final version. Like, I think what I did in the final version was a lot better. It's interesting to see how much story improvements I've made within 3 years. Now in the next part of the story, the Blue Toad tells them that the Master of Gears is finally arriving, but they aren't too thrilled about this because that would mean Twila could leave now. Later, Tumble wants to know why Twila is sad, and she tells him that she doesn't want to leave Brighton. Tumble suggests that she could stay, but before she answers, the Master of Gears arrives on his gear-powered boat. He helps Twila get a new gear. He finds a new replacement gear. The gear number is 120604, which is a reference to the American release date of Mario Party 6. In the final version, it was changed to reference the Japanese release date of the game, 111804. Later, they head back to Twila's airship, where the gear has been replaced. Twila is sad and tells Brighton that she doesn't want to leave him, and she wants to stay with him. This is also very similar to the final version. But in the early version, they tell each other that they aren't so lonely when they're together. Aw, I should have included that part in the final version. Maybe I'll use that for a different video. Now, the rest of the story wasn't included in the final version. The part that happens next is that the party island is finished, and the Blue Toad is ready for the grand opening. I just remembered why I picked a Blue Toad for this story. I was playing Super Mario Maker 2's story mode at the time I was making this comic. I remembered because in the comic, the Blue Toad says that the island needs a ruler, and Tumble asks why the Blue Toad isn't the ruler, and the Blue Toad explains that he's a busy construction worker. That's how I remembered. But anyway, the Blue Toad picks Brighton and Twila to be the rulers of the island. They cut the ribbon and everyone celebrates. Also, this picture is cute. The story goes back to the present where Nimbula tells them that that was a great story and she starts to get sleepy. Brighton and Twila tell her that they love her very much, and Nimbula tells them that she loves them too. Nimbula is so cute. I can't wait for you all to meet her in the series later on. The story concludes with Brighton and Twila flying to the airship and looking at the stars in the sky, and they agree that it's just like when they first met, and that's the story. Wow, this video became way longer than I thought, but that's the early version of When Brighton Met Twila. By the way, I actually didn't use this comic as a reference for the final story. I made the script for the final story with everything I remembered and everything I wanted to use. You could see how the early version is completely different, yet there are some parts that are similar to the final version. The whole Mario Party stuff is still an interesting idea. I don't know if I make a separate story about all that though, but yeah, it was fun to look back on the early version and see how much has changed in the final story. Now I actually have an early version of Our Special Day as well. It's not as interesting as this one, but if you're super curious about it, let me know. Well, that's all for this video. Thank you for watching, now go have some fun.